Welcome to University of the West, a private, nonprofit Buddhist-affiliated university located on 11 beautiful acres of hillside outside of Los Angeles, California. University of the West was founded upon the values of character, compassion, and community.
Welcome to Graduate Students Club first colloquium of the semester with Dr. Ninh. We are very honored to have her as the first speaker of the colloquium. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation, Dr. Ninh. I'd like to, although you all know her, I'd like to introduce her to you. Dr. Thien-Huong Ninh teaches here at UWest currently what is it? Social scientific study of religion. Right, that's right. And she also teaches at UCSB, University of Santa Barbara, for Asian American Studies. Her research and teaching interests include Asian religions and Christianity, diaspora, racial and ethnic relations, and international migration. She received her PhD in sociology from USC, University of Southern California in 2013, and was a Gaius Charles Boland Fellow in the Department of Religion at Williams College until 2014. Right. So could you warmly welcome Dr. Ninh?
Yeah, thank you so much for Mika and the university for inviting me here to give this talk on a method that I've been using a lot. I've been reading a lot about it, dreaming about it, even talking to it as it's a subject. So I've used this method in all my research, and so it's been almost, I think, a third of my life already. So that's probably one of the longest relationships I've ever had. So it means a lot for me to come here and be able to talk to you about it. And this is a very interactive presentation. So I put presentations in quotations because I really want it to be interactive. So feel free to contribute, ask questions, comments. Please feel free to do it. Okay. Okay. So I will actually ask for your presentation right now. So, look at this picture. This is the picture that I took when I was in the field. And pretend you're there with me. So this is at a religious festival. And as you can see, people are praying, holding, there's also incense. He's holding incense, as you can see, incense sticks. So look at this picture, okay? Try to take a photo of that, okay? And then look at this picture. How is it different and similar other than the angle?
Can you go back?
Huh?
Can you go back?
Okay, sure. This picture, okay? And this picture.
The focus,
Pretend, yes.
focus is on the child and the father.
The father.
Yeah. And before, the guy was the focus, the tall guy.
Or actually
This
the
guy,
whole group?
or this guy.
Yeah.
This guy was.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'd say it's more of the whole group because the focus is sort of flat through the whole field.
The last guy had many incense.
This guy right here.
Maybe he make a wish.
He's working very hard.
In this photo, there's not the gentleman with the hat, with the red hat,
Red hat.
the red helmet. He's not in there.
Oh,
Yeah,
in this
not in
photo?
there.
Oh, yeah.
there he is, right there.
Wow, good observation, Mark. Impressive. Right here. Do you see this? Yeah, very good observation.
To me, the big thing is the fact that the previous picture showed context in the sense of those seats and the benches
Yeah, right here.
and those
right?
things back there. So it shows more of
Yeah.
the context of what it's part of.
Right. Very, very good. Very good observation. You already are a researcher doing ethnographic method. So basically what it is, as you can see, is observing, right? When you go out in the field, you observe, and that's a central foundation of ethnographic, is being attentive. But did you notice how each of you also noticed different things? Did you notice that? So is ethnographic method not scientific? Because each person sees one thing. Mark saw the red hat, right? And then Alan saw the benches, but Mark didn't really, maybe he did, but he didn't say it, but he saw the red hat much more. Do you see that? So what does this mean? Does this mean, is this science then? Like everyone's seeing different things, right? Okay, what do you think? Uh-oh.
It's very subjective
Mm-hmm, yes,
for interpretation.
yes, it is.
Different hermeneutics.
Right.
Oh.
That's a big word.
Oh, you got.
That's the word in our class.
Right. So this is something I would like to talk more. You know, is that when you go in the field and each person has his or her own set of eyes, right? And so how do you know what you're seeing is really what you're seeing, right? Like Mark, you saw the red hat. Alan saw the benches, right? Do you know what I mean? And then Venerable Sayan was more attentive to the incense, right? And what about the other people? Do you know what I mean? So we're going to try and go through this presentation. Is that in fact I would argue that ethnographic method is a scientific method, and we're going to delve into that later on. Even though each of you have your own views of seeing the world, right? But okay. So what is ethnographic method? So ethnos is folk, people, nation, and graphos is field study. So ethnographic method is a way to study folk, people, nations. So often cultures, people's lives are central to ethnographic method. And it's been used, it was founded, or should I say developed by anthropology, but now increasingly it's being used by many other disciplines, including religious studies. So you may know Robert Arce. He's a famous, well-known scholar of religion. He was at Harvard, but now he's at Northwestern. And his book is The Madonna of 115th Street. So as you can, the way he studied religion is beyond just religion from text, which I'm sure many of you have already studied, right? You read the text or Bible, religious books. But he wants to emphasize the fact that religion is also lived. So what people read from text and the way they live is very different, right?
Can you explain between the ethnographic and the sociology?
Yeah, sure, definitely. So ethnographic method is also used in sociology as well. So I'll show it soon. It was developed by anthropologists, but increasingly it's being used across disciplines, so religious studies as well as sociology. The methods are similar, but in terms of the theory, it's different. Yeah, so for example, so can I share your abstract? So I had a chance to read your abstract, right? So your interest might be more on a religious studies perspective, right? Because you're studying that temple and the Vietnamese community. Whereas for me, I might be interested in issues of adaptation, assimilation. So it's more sociological. But for you, it may be about faith. It may be about more religious studies issues. You know, so the theories are different. So I won't talk a lot about theories here, but theories is what shape what you collected, the data you collected differently. Remember from our class, we kind of talk about theory?
Yep.
Yeah, so theory shapes how you see the data. Yes, general.
So does that mean sociology is got through more with religion, faith, and belief than ethnography?
No.
In the context that you're trying to explain.
No, ethnography is also used in sociology. It's a method of collecting data, but sociology is a discipline with a set of theories. There are certain theories. So for example, you already know the word assimilation, right? That's a theory developed by sociologists. Lived religion is, created by Robert Arce. He's a religious studies scholar. So it's just a certain theories that you're engaging with. But okay, so here he's Robert Arce is a scholar of religion. But Wendy Cage also wrote about Buddhism, and we read part of her chapters, right? And she's a sociologist, right? Same method, and also studying religion, but in a different discipline, right? Sociology. So she's more concerned with issues of adaptation, because she's looking at first generation and she wants to see how they're adapting to life in the US, right? It's just a different set of theory. One good way to know their expertise in the discipline is look at their bibliography. If they cite more sociologists, you know it's a sociology work, right? That's one easy way, I'm not saying that's the only way, but it's one easy way. Right? But religious studies, remember, is also very interdisciplinary, right? So there are historians as well as more like text scholars as well as anthropologists, sociologists, right? Yeah, so Wendy Cage also, she's a sociologist, by the way. She also wrote this book that we're reading, very ethnographic, right? And she's studying religion, right? And she's based in sociology department, but the way she talks, the religious scholars, religious studies scholar also use her work, right? So yeah, religious studies is very interdisciplinary. Keep that in mind. Even though the method, in this case, is the same, ethnographic methods, right? Used by sociologists, religious studies scholar, who define themselves solely as a religious studies scholar, as well as other fields. But yeah, are you writing this down, Arabian?
Speaking of the writing, the thing you gave us from Emerson,
Yeah.
the writing,
Right.
it was very detailed
Mm-hmm.
and quite moment by moment.
Right.
And you ask us to like look at what that was compared to what we might do for
Right.
chaplaincy, which would be verbatim,
Yes. Yes.
which are reflective but not that detailed. But
Right.
so and then it talked a little bit about how hard it might get in the way of interacting with people to have
Yeah.
a notebook and pen.
Right. Right.
Is it like, do they learn shorthand or do you?
Some of them do.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of them do that, or just write down certain keywords when they collect data. But I'll go in more. I think that's a very good question because verbatim can be seen as on some level similar to field notes, but on some level it's also different. So I'll go into that soon. And remind me if I forget. Yeah, remind me. Okay, so here I'm just giving you some examples of some of the works that have studied religion and using ethnographic methods. And as you also, religious studies deal with issues that can't be quantified, right? Like, how much love do you have for meditation? You might say 10, I might say 5, and you're like, what's 5? What's 6? Right? Do you know what I mean? What's 7 to venerable? It might be, 10 to me. Waking up at 5 a.m., that's a lot to meditate, right? Do you know what I mean? But for you, it's like you do it regularly, so it's normal for you. So as you can see, there are certain questions in religious studies in which you have to use ethnographic methods in order to understand. You cannot use quantifiable methods, which is quantitative methods. Okay, so objectives, as I mentioned briefly, is to understand, the objective of ethnographic methods is to understand processes and meanings. So understanding, for example, well, why don't you give me an example from some of your interest? Because you deal with religious studies. What are some of your interests in religious studies? Some of the questions that you might have. Yes, Mika.
What kind of practices are helping women to be empowered and healed?
Right. Right, so as you can see, like, what kinds of practices help women be empowered and healed, right? Practices are concrete, am I right? You can like say maybe they pray, meditate, right? But the word empowered, like what's empowered to you might be not empowered to me. Am I correct? Right? But the whole point is really trying to understand what it is for them and then what you think empowerment is. So in studying in ethnographic methods, it's not just about what you're studying, the woman in this case, but also you in this study. It's back and forth. What do you think empowerment is, Mika? Tell me some of the empowerment you think is, some of the strategies that are considered as empowerment for these women.
Empowerment for me means to never be a victim, but a person that thrives.
Okay, right. What's empowerment for you? I'll ask you in the back. For a woman.
Me?
Yeah, or you.
Empowerment, access to education.
Right, see, access to education. But do you see how it's different?
Yeah.
Right? But when you're a scholar, let's say I'm interviewing you and trying to understand strategies. So for me, I'm trying to understand Mika's as well as Mandy, right? Mandy's, right? And as well as trying to understand what my preconceptions are, right? Maybe for me, empowerment is, I don't know, getting to go shopping every day. That's my empowerment, you know, right? What if that's my empowerment? And then I talk to Mika and Mandy, I was like, wow, maybe maybe there are other forms of empowerment, right? And then so I, as a researcher, come in getting to know their views, and then I myself are also changing or trying to understand why they have those views. Why don't they like shopping? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's very interactive. You see that? So because imagine if you go into any field, you're new. And even if you're seen as not new, you may not know everything yet. Like we've known each other for at least a year, but you still don't know everything about me. And I don't know everything about you, right? So our perceptions are different. So ethnographic, you talk to those people, observe them, trying to understand the meanings and processes, okay, of what's important for them. And as a result, what you see is multiple truths, and we just gave an example, right? My truth is shopping, Mika is not, right? Mandy is access to education. Do you see that? They're still valid, doesn't mean I'm less, and Mandy's more, or I'm more and she's less. Do you know what I mean? Yes, Ellen?
Well, process of meanings. Where does the language of values come into play there, or does it? Is that something different than value system? You value altruism over selfishness. You value justice over authority. There's a whole set of values that are part of this. And does that fit in or into this objectives or?
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, what's valuable for you may not be valuable for me, right? So many people here value Buddhism, Buddhist practices, but not everyone may do that. Am I correct? So with ethnographic method, you're trying to understand why are these people are like me, valuing Buddhism, but not like the other people. How come? What's wrong with the other people? Why aren't they like me, right? Do you get what I mean?
Right.
So the method will allow you to go in there, trying to understand why do they worship a different religious figure, right, or a god, but not Buddha, for example, right? Things like that. Okay. So especially in religious studies, ethnographic methods is so important because it gets into these issues, right? Like Alan mentioned, values, right? Like you really have to understand, talk to people, observe them to really know why certain activities or beliefs are important to them. And even though it may seem like micro level, because I'm observing a particular scene or a temple, or I'm just talking to one person, but it's also important to link what you observe to macro phenomenon. What does this mean?
Small observations linked to already established theory.
Some of it can be theories or just
A trend?
realities. Yeah, a trend. It could be a trend. Yeah, or it could be that you're observing something at this temple, but it's not what you're observing in the whole society, right? So you're linking why is this unique or why is it similar, to the macro phenomena. So for example, you referring to the picture that I showed you at the beginning, you see a lot of people coming to this festival. You might say, oh, they're very religious, right? That's good. They actually have time to go. Or maybe they're just anxious. They need more blessings, right? So you link it maybe because there's an economic downturn, and so they have to go to temples more because they're nervous about their jobs, right? Or, do you see that? You have to link it to what's happening on a macro level to understand it more. And I know many of you, especially those who have taken my class, have studied, interview people, right, or temples. The next step, which is very important, the next step is, and I think in my opinion, and this is probably one of the hardest steps, and even for me too, is to okay, sure, this is great, it's happening here at your temple or your group, but who cares about it if the rest of the world don't care, right? But what you're saying does matter if you can link it to larger issues. You ready? So keep that in mind. So you might be saying just one temple or one group, one movement, it still matters, right? If you can link it to larger phenomenon.
Is there a danger of generalization now? Because this, this is happening here,
Right.
then, it might mean that other areas of this ethnic group are doing the same thing.
Right.
You know?
I mean, it's that's a very good question. The issues of generalization, right? Because ethnographic methods, you're interviewing maybe just 10 people or
Right.
20 people, and yet you might make a conclusion about larger things. And so that's a very good question. The whole point again of objectives, of the objectives of ethnographic methods is not generalization, it's process and meanings, right? So again, as we did the example earlier, my meaning is different from yours, right? Different from Alan, right? Different from Venerable Sayan. Do you know what I mean? We're all different. So the whole point of the ethnographic method is reveal that. Do you see that? That diversity, that multiple voices and perspectives. And to understand why in the end we're motivated to go to the temple, right? We're very different. You might be motivated to go get good grades. I might want to go drink more vodka, right? We're all different, right? But we go, I mean, just because we go to a temple doesn't mean we have the same motivation, right? It's totally different. Mark.
So I'll give an example of what, when I was in Korea,
Yeah.
I was pushing a shopping cart,
Mm-hmm.
and older generation of Koreans would come up to my shopping cart,
Mm-hmm.
and they would stick their head inside the shopping cart looking at what I was buying.
Wow.
And mostly what they were looking at was the cheese that I was buying.
Oh.
So in a way, so this happened several times, and
Right.
and it made me wonder what is happening in a larger scale. Why
Right.
are they looking at what I'm
Right.
buying? So
Right.
would that reality be that cheese was new to Korea,
Yes.
and that they want to know what is somebody who's used to cheese and what they're buying to find the right
Yes.
cheese?
Right.
Okay.
Very good example. I think that's very, so at a micro level, it seems like you're dealing with a group of women, elderly women, who are looking at your shopping cart. But in fact, it reflects a larger trend where cheese is new in Korea and people are curious about it. And especially because you look like someone not from Korea, they want to know which brands you're buying, right? It's like maybe, it's more legitimate, right?
Right.
And so I think you have a very good point. You see it? Linking. Yeah? Huh? But I think, in my opinion, this is very hard. In my opinion, it's standing back, right, from what you're observing, and then contextualizing in big pictures. Right? Okay, so that's the objectives of ethnographic methods. And I'd like to just briefly talk about ethics. So on top here it says ethics, which is developed by AAA, American Anthropological Association. When you collect data, just make sure you don't harm anyone. Be open and honest of your role as you go into the field. Get permissions to be there, and make sure that you're weighing the ethical obligations. So getting the data, and if it harms someone, maybe you should try to get those data. If it harms someone. Make your results accessible. That means sharing with other people, publishing it, putting online. With technology nowadays, so easy to share your work. And then preserve your records. So when I was collecting data for my dissertation, I had to buy these external drive that's password protected, and it can only be opened with my thumbprint.
Ooh.
Yeah, only my thumb can open it. The main point is to protect and preserve the records. And I wasn't dealing with issues that are, in my opinion, very dangerous. I'm just talking to people at different religious communities, but I have to do that to preserve their identities. What if maybe, so I research Vietnamese people and their religious lives. What if the Vietnamese government finds out? And the Vietnamese government is targeting a particular religious group, right? just in case, right? And their identity is revealed. That's not good. So you're in Vietnam. Do you know Hoa Buddhism? Some of you know Hoa Buddhism, right? Right. So it's extremely marginalized in Vietnam. So when I was there, I was able to collect a lot of data because the government won't let us go there. So, but I went as a maintain respectful ethical relationship. Oops. But all these things, I want to mention, also emphasize that at large universities, research, especially research university, these are standards that the IRB makes hold up to and kind of like asks us to adhere to. So there's a process in which you apply to get approval for your research, which is to the IRB, which stands for Institutional Review Board, or IRB. So most projects, even including students who want to do research, they have to get permission from IRB. And usually if the school is large, they already have one there. And if your school doesn't, sometimes you have to ask an IRB at a different place, a different institution for approval. And that's the main point of doing that again is to protect the data. Yeah.
So,
Is that new for people, the IRB?
yeah, so if I were to go to Japan,
Yes.
I would need to contact the university there.
You can, and then ask for I don't know if Japan has the same kind of review process, you know, the IRB, but I know in the US you must.
So if
Yeah.
I were to go to Texas, I
Right.
would need to contact the university near where.
Right, and ask them for approval, the IRB approval. So again, this is mainly to protect the people you're observing, and especially if you're interviewing them. So they might share a lot of intimate information. Okay, just real quick on this only, because I feel like most of you are probably ethical, but I do want to emphasize that this is something that professional organizations are aware of, not just AAA, but also other professional organizations as well. Yeah. And I'm sure when you write your verbatim, there's a certain level of ethics, right, to protect the people who share with you private information, right? You have to protect the data, right, and your field notes or your verbatim, correct? Yeah.
We
Yeah.
use alias, name.
There you go. That's one way, right? To change their names, right? That's one way. Yeah. So just keep that in mind, okay? But okay. Oops. So here I have ethnographic methods, observation and interview. So that's me. I went to a festival. It was really crowded, and as you can see, I'm holding a video recorder. So I was recording data. There are different ways to record data, not just looking and taking photos, but also record. It was a really fun event, and it was so crowded. I felt like I need videos to show, how lively this festival was, and it was amazing. And so when you go out in the field, you want to immerse into that community. So here I'm Vietnamese American from the U.S. And this is what's in Vietnam, right? So in a way you can say, well, I'm different because I'm American, but also I'm Vietnamese, so it's like confusing, right? So it's insider, outsider status, and I'm sure some of you may feel this, especially if you're part of a community already. When you go into the community, it might be easy to think that you're already part of it, okay? Say, oh, I go to this temple all the time, or I'm Vietnamese, I go to Vietnam all the time, I already know everything, but in fact, I don't. I don't know everything. Right? It's very different. So I try to culturally immerse myself into that community. And it's important to talk to gatekeepers. So who are some of the gatekeepers at temples? Especially temples. Venerable Saiyan is one.
First ones you meet are the temple dogs.
The dogs, okay. You do need their permission to cross.
You need to.
Yeah, the Dharma protectors, yeah, you need their permission.
Do they have like secretaries like churches do? Do they have secretaries like churches do?
I don't know. Ask the venerable
Yeah.
monks. Are there secretaries at temples, Buddhist temples?
Yes,
Okay,
we have CEO, we have secretary, we have
right.
like non-profit, everything.
So it's very structurally very organized.
Yes, actually local CEO.
Right here, venerable CEO is right here. See,
That's right.
Venerable Antonio. Right. So there
For
is.
real.
There are gatekeepers, right? So, like even secretary, you have to be nice to them, right? Like everyone.
Actually, at the temple, the people have to be nice to you as your guest. Yeah, welcome you. I mean, everyone.
Mm,
Yes.
so that's nice to hear. Because, well, for me, like my experiences at religious sites is that generally people are very nice, right? Generally, like my first meeting, they're so nice, but they also tell me the answer that I already knew they're gonna say. They knew exactly what they're gonna say, you know. So I was like, okay, he's gonna say this, she's gonna say this, right? I kind of already knew. But then and the way I know is by how they refer to me, right? In Vietnamese, like it's by kin pronoun. So if they call me, oh, professor or researcher, I know they're performing for me, right? They're just telling me what I want to hear. But when they call me, oh, Kanai, which is my daughter or my child, I know they're being honest to me. Or because they accepted me as someone in the family, even though it's like, it's a non-kin family, right? So I know immediately that I'm already part of the family, right? So for example, I researched Caudayas. When I first met them, they just called me like, you know, Go or something, which is Miss, you know. But later on, I felt accepted because I got the chance to know them like 10 years now. So I'm now their daughter. Yeah, so I know that they're much more honest, more open to me, right? But I remember the first few times when I visit any places, any sites, people are very formal and they don't tell you everything.
How do you bypass that? To get dig into the information that you want other than what they told you?
Well,
What you
being
really
nice
know?
to them, right? Being friendly and being honest with them, right? Telling them your intentions and why. I think honesty is very important,
Right.
especially if you're developing this relationship over a long period of time. Especially you're going to be there for many years, 2-3 years collecting the data, right? So it's important to be honest. And sometimes I make mistakes and I just laugh at myself. Because I don't know all religions, right? So I think because I show the fact that I'm generally interested in learning their lives, and I respect what they do, then they open up.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess from that perspective, you have to introduce yourself like you are a researcher, you're a professor at this such and such, you come here to do research. You have
Right.
to give
Right.
that kind of introduction to them, right?
Right, I do. So in my introduction, I would be honest and say what I do. So let's say I come here to collect this data, and I like it to be at your church or temple. Can I get permission? And then almost always they're nervous, but if you're persistent, they'll be. And once they know that you have good intentions, then you can get in, But I think that for many of the venerables here, if you choose to study your own temple, you're your own boss in a way, right? Like, I give myself permission to this temple. Am I correct? Right? I mean, the temple you're choosing, that temple well already, correct? But gatekeepers is not only kind of like the people who have the titles, but even people who you want to talk to. They're the gatekeepers to their information, right? So if, let's say you want to talk to a family, they might be so nice to you, because they know you're venerable. Yeah, then they won't say to you anything. That's like, oh, my family's perfect. Nothing's wrong with them. Everything's perfect. I'm a good Buddhist, right? But they may not tell you the truth, right?
That's one thing I'm really afraid of when doing my fieldwork, because
Right.
as a status of maybe a monastic,
Right.
they want to portray like in a role that, oh, you are a good Buddhist, but they want like saying the other side of the truth that they don't
Right.
normally reveal.
Yeah.
And how am I going to supposed to write it or document it on paper?
Right.
So it's often, I find that's a challenge for me.
Right. No, it is a challenge. So those people are a gatekeeper of their own information to you, right? But again, I think ethnographic methods, what's important to keep in mind is that you yourself have a particular role, so you can get a certain kind of data. and that's okay. Because what kind of data, because there are multiple truths, right?
Right.
What you're able, so let's say I also go to your temple, interview the same people, I get different kinds of data. I bet you, there's a high chance I will get a different kind of data. That doesn't mean my data is better than yours or yours is better than mine. It's just different truths, multiple angles. And so when you write your research results, you situate yourself in it. So you say, I'm a venerable, serving at this temple for XYZ number of year. I'm aware that people have seen me mainly in robe, and they may not share with me certain issues, things like that. So it shows that you're aware of it.
Okay.
Me, on the other hand, is different, right? So that's why I love. That's one of the beauty I love about ethnographic method is that really you get different, kinds of data, from different angles, and all of which reflect something. Yeah.
But will that disturb the objectivity of it, or the real reality that has been in place before my arrival?
Like you mean like the people there who are in
What they do normally
Right.
when I'm not there when I'm present, and then once I come here, I play a different role, and perhaps that they ask me to do certain things that could change the whole kind of reality of it.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying.
Right.
Will
That's-
that disturb the?
Right, that's why you try to be aware of it, of these kind of issues that would come up, and you write in your field notes.
Okay.
So you really, again, even in your role, you have to try to do cultural immersion, right? It's a different kind of immersion for me, right? For you, it's trying to really get to know those people who come to the temple that you regularly attend, and then for me, going there is probably a different kind of cultural immersion. Over time, we will actually become resocialized. What does that mean? Like we, the researcher, yeah.
So, would it be, instead of a monastic playing a role of asking people of what it is to, would it be also effective for us to be in normal clothes and we ourselves immerse in that culture without anyone knowing, and from first-hand experience, we experience the culture instead of asking
Right.
someone else?
Right. You can do that too. So let's say you want to collect data at a temple, but you don't want people to know that you're a monastic. You get to choose to decide to wear your robe or not. You get to. I mean, it's not forced, that you have to take it off. It's up to you. And you negotiate that boundaries, right? Where's the boundary for me to take off my robe and not?
No, I know that it's up to us, but I'm saying from an observation point of view, wouldn't first-hand experience would be a better way of explaining something, or is that against scientific?
No, not against ethnographic methods.
Okay.
No, definitely not. Remember, there are different truths,
Yeah.
right? So what you collect is different from me. So going back to the Kaudai groups, I studied Kaudaiist as well as my advisor, who's a white American, as well as several Japanese scholars. When we come together, we have different data. Because Kaudaists tell us different things. Because they think I'm Vietnamese, so they represent the data in a certain way. And then my advisor, who's non-Vietnamese, it's a different way. And then the Japanese scholars is totally different too. So when we come together, it's kind of fun. It's like, oh, he told me that? He told me this. It's kind of fun. But the whole process of doing that is that it's like, why did they tell you this and not that, right? Why are they so nice and venerable Viet and so rude to me, right? There must be a reason why they're doing this. Again, we're trying to understand the process and the meanings for these people who we're interacting with. Yeah. So as a result, through that process, hopefully through the period in which we collect data, we become resocialized because we understand them more, right? So some people might some people even join the religion. Now this can be ethical issues, right? Are they really joining it because they want to be part of the religion, or are they joining it for the research, right? But some people do join religion, or they marry someone, of that community that they're studying. A lot of anthropologists do this. Yeah, so they go and they study a village in Java, right? Very remote, community, and then some of them try to become part of that community, and one of the way in which they get in is to marry someone local. Some people do that. Now again, like, you have to be the judge of your own ethics. Yeah, that if you choose to enter a community and be socialized, know what your boundaries are.
So your timing about revealing your identity and intentions are pretty important, right? I mean, because I remember one occasion when I was in Asia and I was negotiating for a higher pay, and I just came out and said, I would like, a raise, and the guy said, absolutely no. And a week later, I came out and said, you promised me a raise a long time ago, but now you said no. Why did you say no? And he said, well, because you didn't show respect by asking me, how my day was, some small talk.
I see.
So I was just, so here in the United States, our bosses sometimes don't like us to waste their time, so they ask us to be direct, and not waste their time, and so it would be more polite to ask directly. But in this case, he wanted to, it to be indirect, and he wanted to have a little bit of. So in this way, revealing our identity and intentions might be really direct in one place and indirect in another. So how do you gauge that, not knowing a community, if you're just coming in?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, if you're first coming in, and I will probably act kind of like you, based on what I know, right?
Yeah.
It's like direct, right? Or just act that way I normally would. And then slowly, as I observe them, get to know their culture, their lifestyle, I'll become resocialized. I'll adapt that style. So here, he told you that you need to kind of small talk with him. So the next time you ask for a raise, you do that.
Right.
If you want a raise.
That's what I did. Yeah,
right? And then you'll get it. Do you see that? You're willing to re-socialize. But also there are certain boundaries, right? Like, let's say it's like, I don't want to do that. You don't have to, right? If you don't want to do the small talk, then you won't get what you want. I mean, it does reflect that you don't want it that much, right? Right? If you don't want to do the small talks.
Or more realistically, the society you're in requires a bribe before they'll give you a raise. So you have to bribe them, and you decide you're not going to do that.
Right. These are ethical issues that you have to juggle with. Okay. So trying to understand indigenous meaning, trying to understand people, their lives and culture, is really one of the major goals of ethnographic data. So now I have this fun project. So I'm going to ask you to watch this video. And then I want each of you to take notes as much as you can, kind of like what we did for the photos, but this is going to be a video. So imagine you're observing it, and this camera will take you through this temple, Buddhist temple in Singapore. Make notes as much as you can, and then we're going to share it. Pretend you're a researcher. Okay? Can you hear it?
Yeah, so far.
It looks like your eyes looking at this. you share your notes?
Donations?
Donations? Yeah. Venerable Viet.
Well, what I see is, people keep putting coins at the coin holder, whatever. So I guess instead of one, there's like a whole row. So I guess by putting, from the interpretation, people by putting that, the more they put it, the more merits they're going to gain out of it. That's my guess anyway. And the kind of like the decoration is very, as you can see, very colorful, very bright, very elaborative. And also, I think there's different section where in the middle there's some kind of statue, and on the side there's some kind of like chairs, and with the separator. It signifies that there's some kind of festival about to happen, or some kind of I don't know, concert, or some kind of rituals is going to be performed. Yeah, that kind of thing. So I observed.
Does that look familiar to you? Have you seen a scene similar to that?
Yeah.
Right?
I guess it's
With
going
this
to be.
temple.
Yeah.
Yeah? Yes, Venerable.
I hear some sound popping, like firecracker.
Huh? Firecracker?
Yeah, so
Oh.
it's like a festival that's happening like that.
Yeah, that's a good observation.
Las Vegas.
That's right. That's a good
And
one.
gambling,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
right, gambling.
Gambling for karma.
That's what was going through my mind was I bet there was probably somebody outside making change for dollars. Or,
Right.
and I was wondering what would be the exchange rate.
It's a lot of money, isn't it?
Yeah.
But do you see how we make different connections, right? Las Vegas versus firecrackers, right? Versus a machine that changed money. Yes.
It reminded me of Silai Temple, except it was much more gold, like filled with gold.
Right.
And the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas, they look different from Chinese statues. And they kind of, I figure they're trying to replicate Pure Land or something.
Oh, that's a good observation. I didn't even notice that. But do you see how we all have different views of seeing the one thing only? And the ways in which you write your notes, your field notes, or talk about or remember this is to say that, like, it reminds me of firecracker. That's fine. That's your own experience, right? So you situate yourself in the data as well. It's not like you're separated from it. You're part of it. But then as you get, let's say you live at this temple for a year, your perception might change, right? Say, oh, well, it making maybe it's something else. Maybe, people are just very generous, wanting to contribute a lot, and it's generally because, it's their genuine interest or wanting to contribute, to this temple. Actually, did you know I think I read online, it's the richest temple in Singapore or in Asia. Right. That would be an interesting site to study. Why is this temple getting a lot of donation, right? So as you live there and stay there more, you might see something else different, right? It might be easy to think that you're familiar with this scene, but remember there might be other things going on that we may not be aware of. So as a researcher, when you come into field, you should be aware that you may not know everything yet. So I'm going to give you another scene in which it's Day of the Dead. You know Day of the Dead?
Yeah, we had that celebration.
Oh yeah, it was here. Do many of the monastics know Day of the Dead? Nope. Good. Perfect. I don't expect you to know. So this is a totally new community, right? For many of you. So I won't say much. We'll see what you gather from this, okay?
Hi, we're in Riverside. And we're going to ask this fella a couple of questions about this festival we're at. Here we go. Okay.
This is Dia de los Muertos. It's an indigenous type of an event. They do this time to celebrate the people that have died in the past. They do this by putting an altar usually in front of their houses, and what they do is they put water, which signifies the spirits drinking the pure water. The candles represent the spirit's light traveling in the distant past. And there's a lot on the altar. There's a lot of things that are put on that represent what the muerto used to like. So that's a little bit about Dia de los Muertos today.
And what's your name?
My name is Alex Flores.
Alex, I appreciate you telling us about this. This is the first time for me, frankly. My name's William. I'm interviewing the various ghosts. You're in a get-up here. What is symbolized? What is the get-up all about?
Well, we're Katrinas. There's a Katrina contest.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm changing it so you can hear better.
Yeah, plug
But
it
you
in.
can't hear?
Plug it in.
Plug in.
I plug in already.
No, plug in the speakers to the wall.
Oh, to the wall. I'm
Needs to be
sorry.
powered, yeah.
Can I pull the white one? The
We'll
white
find out. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't realize you can't hear. Let me move back.
What is
Okay.
the first time for me, frankly, on YouTube. My name's William.
So low.
I'm interviewing the various ghosts. You're in a get-up here. What is
Increase the volume.
What is the get-up all about?
Yeah, it is.
Well, we're Katrinas. There's a Katrina contest.
Okay.
And that Katrina is about, I think it's originated in Mexico City. An artist wanted to, wealthy people, how they would look
When they're dead. So a Katrina is a wealthy dead person.
There's these fancy ladies that
And
So there's a contest tonight for that? Yeah, it's at the library. And we're showing at the Amigas Viejas, old friends, the old friends.
the old friends. Okay, so you're representing very well. You're doing a very good job. You look.
Okay. All right. What do you think of that now? That scene? Pretend that you were there. Day of the Dead. Very. Oops. I don't know what that came. Sorry.
TMI.
I feel there's a culture differently from my Asian perspective to the whatever culture is. I mean, in our culture, if people die, we feel very sad kind of thing, or even the commemorate.
Yeah.
You know, we feel very sad, we mourn and that kind of thing. But this is more like it's a day of celebration. It's a festival. People being dressed up in costume. This contest happening,
Right.
and this music on the background.
Right.
So it's in a way that this day is a unification between the dead and the people who are alive,
Right.
bringing them together to come and enjoy it before they depart again, that kind of thing. So yeah.
Yeah, it's very different, right, from Vietnamese culture. Yes, Mark.
Well, I was seeing the similarity because I was seeing that, they had the altar, they had the picture, and they had many things around it, and the water, and all these things. I was seeing a similarity in the culture.
Bright lights, colorful.
Do you see these two different perspectives?
Yeah, it's very colorful, very uplifting.
Right.
Yeah, I think that also in the celebration, there's a thing that we observe 3 deaths: the day you die,
Right.
the day you are buried,
Right.
and the last time anyone ever mentions your name.
Oh.
So this is staying in connection with those that you never forget them. So once a year you see the photos and you say their names again. And in that way, in that culture, that person will never die, in a sense.
Yes, yes. It's very, very good observation. But it's also very different from the general American society, right?
Yeah.
Where, am I correct? Where if someone passes away, it's so sad that they don't want to see the picture of that person again. Am I correct? Whereas in Mexican and Asian culture, they actually would hang out the portrait of that person.
I don't necessarily think that's true, but.
No, it's not true?
Yeah, I
Okay.
think it might take a little while, but it's not uncommon for people to have pictures and stuff of their dead in this society. It's not something that you would normally just do immediately. It would have to be after some of the pain is
Right,
gone.
right, because it's really painful for them to see the photos again, am I
Right.
correct? Whereas I think in Asian societies, often it's they have the portrait everywhere.
Everywhere, immediately.
Yeah, it's very
right,
important.
Right at the funeral.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
extremely important. I saw a hand. Yes, Venerable.
I think when they interviewed the two ladies,
Right.
And they are from different culture, American.
Right.
So that's another culture. They say because they are not exposed to people having like review what the dead are like.
Right.
So they are trying to do this. They show this is what the dead is like.
Right, right. Yeah, they're trying to immerse themselves also, right, into this event, right? The way in which they're dressed, their makeup, right? And so as you can see, if you're collecting data, maybe you can be dressed up like them too. If you want. Again, it depends on your role, right? You have to decide you want to really be immersed or kind of like a little distance, right? But wouldn't it be great if you're actually dressed up like them?
Yeah,
You're gonna get yeah, you would get all kinds of information. Yes, Venerable Andrew.
Actually, I experienced before at UWest cafeteria about this ceremony. I think this year or last year. It's between Halloween season.
Right, right.
So it's remind me to the Thai culture that actually after the people passes away, we're gonna also make a merit for that person or that group, put the name or photo. That also remind the people that our life is impermanent. So we should take them as an example that we not cling too much to everything and impermanent, and remind how that person great for you or great for the society.
Right, right. That's a very good observation. Yes, Venerable.
I saw a lot of similarities in all cultures actually, because if you notice that there was candles, there was a lot of pictures. The way the altars is set up is kind of almost like a Buddhist, with the statue of Guadalupe, which is almost like the Avalokita or Bodhisattva. And then the uniform or the costume that the two ladies were wearing, if you notice, those are the clothes that you would wear at a funeral because she had a black veil.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
Then, but to say that American culture, some are very sad, is not entirely true, because in New Orleans, during a funeral, yeah, they're sad at the cemetery, but immediately after the cemetery, they would go out and they play music to commemorate the person's life. So then there's music involved, and then Asian cultures, if you've been to an actual Chinese funeral, it's not necessarily quiet. They just talk a lot.
Yeah, they eat too, right?
They
eat a lot. They talk.
Picture. It's just like a festival. It's just,
right.
But I saw a lot of similarities there.
Right.
So that's
Right. These are all really good observations. Very, very good. And so when you write your field notes, you put down what you see. And again, they're not wrong. Venerable V, it's different from Mark. And they're not wrong, right? But they're just very different. That's all. And it's okay. Ethnographic methods allows you to do that, because you see one reality, right, versus other. And what's important is you are honest with presenting who you are in this field. So let's say, oh, I dressed up, or I did not dress up, right? You'll probably get different kinds of answer or data, right? Let me, so that says reflexive science. Reflexive, which is really what ethnographic methods is. So I'm going to write it down because it's not showing up. So there are two, so reflexive science is, you're reflecting, you're situating yourself in that, reality, in that thing. So the inseparability of data methods, what you're observing and how you're gathering it, your methods, which is talking to people or observing them or taking photos, are connected, right? What you saw is very different, and all of us are. So the two are very intertwined, okay? Data is not objective information. We already discussed this thoroughly. Fluid is changing meanings. We change ourselves. If I were to first come to the U.S. and didn't know much about Day of the Dead, I would see a certain way. Now that I've been here for a while, I see a different way, right? Meanings are creating relations with others, okay? So when you're out in the field, you're creating meanings with the people you talk to or observing. And your reactions and perception are not subjective. In the sense that, like, and I put this in quote, subjective quote, in the sense that you yourself also contribute to the meanings in reality. Because what you see is different from other people, right? You're not separate from the data. Now on this side, okay. And also they are not seeing the researchers' reactions, perceptions, so what you see or how you interact are not considered as contaminants of the data. So let's say I can't say, oh Mark, you're wrong because the ways in which you see Day of the Dead is really I don't know, is shaped by your experience in Asia, for example. I'm just throwing this out, right? It's contaminated by your experience. You're not seeing as what it is, right? But actually that's not a good criticism because part of ethnographic method, you're allowed to do that. That your experience, who you are, shape what you see, and that's okay. And now this is positive science, so different kind of science. So positive science, okay? And often positive science is always criticized reflexive science because it's almost the opposite, right? Data and methods are separate from each other. Can you give me an example of a positive science in which data and methods are separate?
Physics, or at least non-quantum physics.
Yeah, physics, right? Let's say Newton, right? He dropped an apple. Let's see how fast it falls. You see that, right? That's what the reality is. I don't know. 5 meters in an hour or something like that, right? And he'd make a note of it. Is that data and the methods are separate because the data is there. It exists. It can exist anywhere. So let's say I drop the apple, right? And then Veneral Sayan drops the apple. It should be the same, right? It was the same area, same place, right? So as you can see, the data is quite objective, right? Data is objective, right? You can repeat that, and you get the same thing, almost the same thing. Am I correct? Not so in reflexive science, which is ethnographic methods. It's not the same thing. Because when I talk to, let's say I go out in the Day of the Dead, I talk to the same woman. Maybe they're in a good mood. They give me a certain answer. And the next year I go back, they're in a bad mood. They don't like each other. They would give me a different answer. Am I correct? Yeah, so as you can see, the data here is not quote unquote objective, right? It changes, right? Whereas here, data is objective, right? Like the example I gave, Newton dropping the apple. If I go to the same place where he dropped it, I probably get the same answer, right? How fast the apple dropped to the ground, correct? Okay. So it has fixed meanings, like I said. It doesn't change as much, the data, okay? Data are independent of the methods, right? The apple drops, that's what it is. It's not influenced by whether I took a picture of it or I touch it or I record it, right? Whereas in this reflexive science, if I take notes, people will react to me differently versus if I just take a picture of them. Am I correct? They act differently. Or if I record them, video record them, they act differently. Correct? Yeah? Whereas, so here in positive science, the data is independent of methods. Very different from reflexive science. So researchers' reactions and perceptions are subjective, right? Again, it's very different from reflexive science, right? Because if I somehow, again, going back to the apple example, dropping the apple, my perception of that data can contaminate that data in positive science. Can you give me an example how? How can a researcher contaminate the data in positive science? Give me an example.
Well, there's a lot of different ways, but one of the most common ones, he drops the apple 10 times and then throws out the so-called anomalies without really understanding why one time the apple dropped 4% slower than the other time, just throws it out. He's contaminated the data where maybe he's seen some sort of true effect.
Very good example, Alan. You guys follow that? Yeah, that's a very good example. So the researcher intentionally contaminated the data. Yeah, but here in reflexive science, the researcher contribute to the meetings because he or she is interacting with the data, right? Did you have a question, Mark?
Well, I was just gonna say, in the reflexive, it's almost we are part of the data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But in this, we're trying to get out of the data.
Yes, it's over there. We're keeping a distance from it. Very good. Mm-hmm. Yes, Mika.
But in interpreting the data, it's inevitably, it has to be interpreted by people, right? So like statistical data too, they have to be interpreted, and interpretation is always some kind of, no?
No, you're correct.
Right.
That's just why reflexive science criticizes positive science.
Yeah.
Right? Positive science say, no, we are representing truth, the only truth, right? Reflexive science, well, actually, even Einstein is being not criticized, but his work is being revised, right? Developed, right? Built on, right? Right? Do you know it? So interpretation is where our perception might contaminate the data. But in positive science, supposedly, no, we don't. The researchers never contaminate the data. But you're correct. We almost always do. And this is the criticism of positive science by reflexive science. Researchers always contaminate the data, always. And it's better to acknowledge it than hide it. Do you get what I mean? It's better to acknowledge that I'm a man studying a group of women, so I understand that they might perceive me in a different way versus a woman studying a group of women. Correct? It's better to acknowledge it rather than say, oh no, I'm a researcher. I go in there, I have my question, and I was just collecting the data. I was really straightforward. Well, right? It's inevitably going to be contaminating. Yes?
Yeah, I think a recent example is what happened with the British researchers on measles, who manipulated the data to say that those measles shots, inoculations, those students those people who get them had a higher incidence of autism. When they looked at that, they realized that they had manipulated the data to reflect their outcome. And of course, we see now that what happens, a lot of parents are no longer willing to inoculate their children because of the manipulation of data. The data was there. They just extracted what they wanted to prove their hypothesis that it would or could cause autism.
Right. It's a good example. Alan?
Well, there's another way that in the so-called positive science, you could contaminate the data in ways that aren't necessarily nefarious. You dropped an apple, you didn't drop a feather. So you're going to get one set of results and one set of understanding because the feather is going to drop slower than the apple. You have to understand why that is. So you'll come up, if you don't examine a feather, you're going to have a theory that's going to be different and not include certain aspects of physical reality. So there's a lot of different ways of contaminating where the subjective, if you're coming at the idea that the Earth rotates, the sun rotates around Earth with that understanding of reality, you're going to run different experiments than you do if you think the Earth runs around it. And so you're going to, that's why it took so long for that that understanding of the world took several hundred years for that to become
hundreds of years
because people didn't run the experiments that would prove the Earth goes around the sun. They ran other experiments.
Yeah, you have a good example. Right. Yes.
Yeah, one thing on the reflective science is I know that could also create problems primarily because I know that when I was in the military, I was in intelligence. When you interrogate a person, that person is most likely going to say what you want him to say. And then we've also seen studies on obedience, the old study in the 50s, that the presence of what looks like an authoritarian figure will also reflect the answers that the person's going to give. So there's also that possibility of getting incorrect data. And I know in intelligence gathering, human intelligence is very, very open to being incorrect.
Yes. No, I agree with you. And that's why I think in reflexive science, they emphasize the fact that we're honest, right? We're honest not just to who we're interviewing or observing, but also to ourselves. Like in my field notes, I would say the first day I come to the temple, no one really talked to me because and I don't know why. I may not know why yet because I was new to the field. And then by the 10th day, I'll be like, well, maybe because I didn't bow or I didn't light the incense, right? because I get to know more. You see that?
Or you didn't say, did you have a nice day?
Okay. Right, do the small talks with the monastics, right?
How was your golf
Right.
game today?
Yeah, that's how you have to talk to Glenn.
But I hope you find this useful. And again, I'm also doing the comparison, right? The researchers are controlled and segregated from the data, right? But they're not. Mika raised a good point. In the process of interpretation or analysis, one's perception is almost always inevitably contaminated, what we see. In reflexive science, at least we acknowledge it. And that way, from acknowledging it, hopefully it creates more conversations and reveal, quote unquote, the truth, the multiple truth, right? Okay, and I don't want to mean to say that these two are against each other. They can be complementary, to each other. So I'll just give you an example. Like I use ethnographic methods, so I study, I go and talk to people, right? But then, it's really nice that there are people who already collected the data for me on the numbers, in this case, there were the numbers of Asian Americans and their religious affiliation, right? So I might say something like, I interview this temple, in Westminster, right? And Buddhists make up, among Asian Americans, 14% only. So they're the third largest, religious affiliation among Asian Americans, even though in Asia, they're probably the highest, right? So at least, as you can see, I'm in dialogue with data collected by positive science. And here in this case, it's more quantitative measure. Do you see that? But I'm not, it's important to know that the two methods are not against each other. They support each other to find science. Do you follow this? Yeah? And often, actually, it's based on my opinion, often if you can be in conversation with positive science, especially, simple things like data, a lot of people really like it and appreciate your work more. Because you're humble, you realize you can't collect all kinds of data. And there are other people who collect this kind of data. Do you follow this? Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is one easy example. How about in religious studies or in chaplaincy here? It's probably just mainly reflexive science, am I correct? Or are there people who teach quantitative methods here?
Well,
no? Yes?
Theoretically, there's objective methods of spiritual analysis when someone comes into the hospital.
Oh, I see.
But I'm not really sure
No,
how.
I don't call it objective methods.
You wouldn't consider it theoretically someone's trying to put positive scientific methods into.
Well, we do have the census that shows, who are
Right.
Christians and who are Buddhists, whatever.
Right.
We have that census, but then we can't rely on it because, just because you say you're Buddhist doesn't mean you're practicing.
But
So we rely more on qualitative interaction.
qualitative, but isn't in at least some hospitals an attempt when someone comes in to have some sort of standard spiritual assessment that
Yes,
all.
well, but it's not objective. It's very, very reflective.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion.
Right.
It's hard to do.
Right.
I don't know how you can do objective
Right.
chaplaincy.
Are verbatims in chaplaincy similar to field notes in just in general anthropology or sociology? Yeah, it is very similar.
It has psychosocial element and then, theoretical and then theological.
And do you situate yourself in the interpretation?
Yeah,
of the
a
data?
lot of yourself, you're really analyzing yourself in verbatim.
Okay, so it's when you
And
write.
a lot of how you felt at the time.
Okay.
In a verbatim, in parentheses, you put your feelings in there or what was going on in your head at the time.
I see.
Yeah, and then you review that with the group, and then they will ask you, well, why did you say the things you said at that time from that verbatim? And you have to think about it. Why did I say that? Yeah.
So there's a lot of similarity then, right? With field notes and verbatim, a lot of similarities. But one of the questions I had is do chaplains ever go out of their service area and help other people, or is it usually people come to them? Because then if they come to you, then you're getting a certain group of people, correct?
Well, if you're doing disaster chaplaincy, you're going out to people who, you know, you probably never met or never knew you, you know, who are in a situation where they need spiritual care, and you know, so that would be a situation where we go out. You know, some forms of police chaplaincy and fire chaplaincy. You know, you may go out as a chaplain and speak to the person whose house just burned down, or maybe lost a child or a family member in the fire. So, you know, I think my understanding is that we do both.
I didn't know that.
I think military chaplains do the same thing.
Yeah.
I see.
Especially in war theaters, they go out.
Right.
Because that's where most of the trauma and tragedy happens. You can't wait for the soldier necessarily to come in, because when they go to church, then you have a minister or you have somebody else. But the chaplain is in the field there with them as some of these events, horrific events occur.
And how do you keep track of your verbatim? Do you, because I assume you might see this person 5 times or more.
I'm not a chaplain.
Or so, like.
Mika's been a professional chaplain, so I'm defer.
You do a verbatim on a very memorable visit, so you remember. And you might take a note after the visit, but during the visit you're just immersing yourself with that person.
I see.
And then after you might take jot down notes, and then you when you're writing you just recollect all the conversation of every bit, and you'd be surprised how much you remember. And you record the conversation, and from recording now you analyze what's going on.
Right. Do you do data coding?
Not in chaplaincy, but in I know that Tina Gothier, she did coding to research the nurses.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, but we don't do coding.
You don't do coding.
That's where I'm interested.
Oh, really? Well, because I assume you might see this one person 10 or maybe even more than that, right? 50 times or something. And so how do you keep track of all the verbatims? I mean, that's quite a lot, right? So in people who use ethnographic methods, sometimes they use this program. It's called Atlas TI. To code. It's a software you have to buy. So coding is like a snippet of field notes, or in this case, in a verbatim, right? Let's say here is, you give it a code, trauma, right? And then in this case, it's, let's say, war, right? And this case is family, something like that. Like this is your verbatim, right? You're writing it. But then with coding, you kind of like capture it with one word, right? One code, right? So it's like, this might be 10 sentences, but when you read a verbatim again, you don't want to read the whole thing again. You just want to know exactly where trauma is, if that's the kind of information you want. And then this program will pull up all the codes that you attach trauma to. So let's say, so it's week 2, he talked about trauma. And then the 5th time I see him, he also talked about trauma. And look, this is how he talked about it, right? So it's that, so you don't have to go through like 10, 50 verbatim to find trauma. Do you know what I mean?
We have notes that we have to write as chaplains, medical notes.
Right.
So that could be that source too.
No, you can also code your notes. So like your codes, I mean, I've worked in team, and our codes can be as many as 100, which is way too many. Sometimes it's nice if you have a particular question and you're interested in particular issues, to limit it down to a certain number of codes. And but make sure it's useful for you, but not overwhelming, right? Like 100 codes might be too much. So let's say for your research questions or your interaction with this particular client, you're concerned of trauma, family, or war, because he talked a lot about this, right? So you code it. And then when you want to see it again, you go to this program, you click on that code. Show me all the times he talked about his family. Then all the times I talk about his family will pop up only. Trauma won't pop up unless it's relevant. Yes, Ellen?
So we have this concept of coding, but how do you quantify, and I realize this is not a positive science, but on the other hand, you have to be able to justify or define trauma in a way that is reasonable and justifiable.
Right.
So, you know, how do you go about saying, well, this is trauma versus this is, you know, maybe something, you know, subtly different. So here's part of the problem. You may be putting a lot of things that don't quite fit into trauma into a trauma basket. And so,
I mean, that is, you're right. I mean, that it might be limited our view, right, to only certain ways of seeing trauma. And our view of seeing trauma might change over time.
Right.
Right, like ourselves, the researcher. But that's why you make a note of it. So this is today, you know, you make a note on the side, you know, my code for trauma as of February 28th, 2015 is this. And then you make a note and say, well, May 1st, you're like, I realize trauma is very complex. It also entails this.
Yeah, PTSD,
Do you know what I mean?
depression,
Right.
You know, suicidal thoughts, you know, there could be a lot of, you know,
Right. But as you can see, you yourself as a researcher, you'll be becoming more insightful, right? As you interact with this person or this community, and you keep track of it. And it's okay, do you know what I mean? Like, rather than assuming, I know trauma since the beginning, right, that I entered the field. Maybe and maybe not, right? Because trauma is a very complex issue, right? But do you see this? So reflective science allow you to do this. It's okay, as long as you're being honest to yourself. Say, you know, I thought trauma means this, but now it means something else to me. And this is how I'm using this code. Yeah?
I can see that really being useful for referrals too. Like, I may have an experience that is useful for one set of problems, but I may know another chaplain who's like really deeply involved with military trauma or PTSD, and then this would be like, oh, well, you know, maybe I could do a referral to this person, and then I could see it being useful in terms of finding that person the right help.
Yeah, that's a good way. Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Mark. Like, as you read, let's say, trauma, right, all your notes about trauma, you realize, well, maybe he's better seeing Venerable Sion, right, who specialized in a particular form of trauma, right, like military or something, right? Then you will say, oh, please, you know, consider seeing Venerable Sion or something like that, right? So I think you have a very good point. So coding, I didn't talk a lot about here because it would require another presentation because it's really complex. But this is a software. I think there's another one, but this is one of the most popular software that people have used. It's called Atlas TI, period TI. Okay, I don't know what I wrote here, but yeah, so some, these are issues that we trust, being aware of how you're inside or outside of that community, and how the fact that you're there might have an impact, impacts what you see or how people act toward you, right? If you're wearing a robe versus not wearing a robe, they act differently toward you, right? And the divide between quote unquote research and being a member of that community, let's say a monk, right? Sometimes that can create some moments in which you have to reflect hardly. Like, can I still be a researcher but still be part of this community? Right? Am I being honest and real to them? Am I just, you know, being a part of this community and selling data? Right? You know, those are the things that you have to keep in mind. So these are the challenges as a researcher using ethnographic methods. But yeah, that's it. This is just photos of me in the field. I know. This is me in the field. It was really fun. Yeah, so they dressed me up and let me play the instrument.
Is that the game Find Professor Ninh?
Huh?
Find You, right? The new game.
Oh yeah, find me in here. Where am I?
Where's Waldo?
Yes.
Yeah, right here. But yeah, that's my presentation. Thank you. Went way over the time limit, but thank you so much.
No, way over. Right on time.
Oh, is it on time?
We're considering the time that the thing was down and other things, yeah.
Actually, 93 minutes.
Oh, perfect.
Whoa.
Oh, good. Well, thank you to everyone for contributing as well, your comments and your participation.
Any other last minute questions particular to the presentation?
Since you know you have a lot of notes to do, how do you organize it to keep
That was my question.
Atlas TI.
So that you can come back later in your experience. How
one way is Atlas TI.
Yeah.
You can treat it as a verbatim or new notes, and then you code it. You can do that way. The way I've done it, because I tried LSTI and I wasn't really successful with it. And so I just kind of like write notes on my own and just keep it as a file. And then in my analysis, when I write a paper or for a chapter or something, then I have pretty good memories. I kind of remember the field notes, so I go back to the field notes from there. But I know people have used LSTI to help them. The other thing that I do is transcripts. So you interview people, you have to have you would ask someone to transcribe for you, or you have to transcribe yourself, which takes a lot of time.
You mean recording?
Yeah.
And then listening and writing and all
Yeah,
that.
transcribing.
It's so much time. Oh.
Yeah, it's a lot of time.
But there's
But you know
software
what
out
I
there.
do?
Yeah.
There's a software.
There's software out there.
Right.
How accurate is it though?
Right.
Well, if it's 80% accurate, it means you only have to do 20% listening.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I use that here at the university
Right.
when I transcribe lectures or group
Right.
meetings. And
Yeah.
like I said, it's about 80% accurate,
Right.
and some of it is
It's
free.
very good. Yeah.
I
So
wonder if
technology
they're
is getting better.
expensive, like Atlas, TI, are they expensive?
I'm looking
those
that up right now.
programs?
Oh, this one, yeah.
Yeah, and before investing to it, make sure that it's useful for you.
Yeah, I know.
Make sure it's useful for you, because I invested it and I for myself, for my project, it hasn't been helpful. But
Yeah.
I've used it for another project.
Because my
Right.
community chair has already told me to code something.
Oh, okay,
So I'm
I
thinking, code, what is that? You
Oh,
know?
I
They do
see.
this.
Yeah.
I'm so sick of
So
this.
this is a part of what coding means.
A student license, 2 years, so you don't own it, you only rent it for 2 years
Oh.
I hate this whole thing of renting, but it's not there. Is $99, so it's
That's
$100.
good.
That's a student license.
That's doable.
Yeah.
That's a student license, yeah.
Yeah, I think for lifetime is, I think it's quite expensive. Like if you want to download the software and you don't have to rent it, things.
Right, a single user license, an educational license that's permanent, that's $670.
Yeah, it's
So
quite
that would,
expensive.
yeah, but
Yeah.
if you're just a student, they give you a discount.
Oh,
Right,
nice.
yeah, it can be.
But it could be a departmental.
Yeah, you could also
purchase.
buy it through, that's basically the educational
Right,
licenses.
and then all the students within that department can use it.
Yes,
So if
exactly.
you buy just a site license
Right.
for the department.
Right,
Yeah.
right. That's how I used it at first, is to use the university's copy, and then from there I realized, okay, well then I like this, and then I purchased a copy, a student copy. Yes, Mika.
My issue is finding the contact in the field and building the trust,
Right.
And so when you went, you just went and just walked in, or did you?
I do.
You did?
Yeah, well, the greatest thing about studying religious communities is people are friendly.
Oh.
Did you notice that? Any religious community, most are, I think, at least the ones I've encountered, right? I've studied under 4 or 5 different religious communities, and I don't really know them. Many of them I don't know them. And they're generally really nice, because when you ask them to talk about faith or the belief, which is so important to many of them, they'll talk on and on and on. I would be like, freak out. I actually have to stop them. Say, oh, thank you. I think I must go. Did you know that? They talk. So that's why it's not that hard. I mean, I'm sure the first time they might be a little nervous because they don't know who you are, right? But once you get to know them, you're honest with them, you're friendly with them, they'll tell you everything about their faith to you. Usually, from my experience, they're pretty, am I correct? Yeah, usually they're willing to do that. So that's the greatest thing about studying religious communities.
They're suckers.
True.
I'll wipe that out. Yeah, because by now everybody will have a voice print of Alan.
Yeah, that's right.
And then say, oh, that's Alan.
That's
Too,
cynic.
a lot of them, they want to be listened to.
Yes,
so
yes, I agree with you.
Yeah.
In that case, you have to put up with it, or you have to be very selective on what you want.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes, back in the days when I was really young, I put up with it. Because I was anxious of getting data, I was like, okay, I'll listen to all of it. But now, once I start counting things, one time I was counting a number of calendars in the room, the number of flowers, I was like, okay, maybe it's time to go. And, I would be kind of nice about it. I'd be like, you know what, I do want to see you again. can we continue this conversation next time? So they know this is not the end. Do you know what I mean? And they like that more because they say, okay, you interview me again. They like that. Rather than saying, oh no, this is over. You know, I don't want to talk to you anymore. So usually from my experience, so far it's been so good.
Okay. So do you usually like get the contact and everything so that you can come back again if you really need to like more data?
Yes.
Once you analyze it?
Yes.
You usually do that?
Yeah, I do. I keep in touch with most of them, especially the gatekeepers, the most important people.
Yeah. I
I almost always do. So religious communities, like, you know, the head of the temple, right? Almost always, right? And then other key members, I keep in touch with them. Like I would tell them like, oh look, I made a presentation about, you know, the temple, right? And they like it, you know, that their time and their energy for me doesn't disappear, right? It's valuable and important for society as well, you know? Yeah, so they really like it. Yes.
Yeah, one of the things, one of the classes that I'm taking at Claremont, I think one of the things they're talking about is for an individual going out in the field is to have a very good understanding of your own cultural filters and lenses.
Yes.
By understanding, you said, you know, you're Vietnamese American, and you blend well in both, but you would probably say that your cultural lens is more American, in a sense, maybe because you spend more time here, because when you go back to Vietnam, you're maybe not necessarily recognized as Vietnamese, but as Vietnamese American, as opposed to when I go to Indonesia, I'm not recognized as Indonesian.
Right.
You know, because
and you're treated very differently.
Right, absolutely. But again, so understanding your own cultural filters and lenses, I think helps in understanding others, so that they can open up to you and you can then, you know, ask questions.
Right. You're perfectly correct. Yeah, that's why it's so important to be conscious of who you are and how you grow or change, you know, in a particular field site or in your relationship with a particular person if you're a chaplain, right? It's very important to be aware, not just studying that person, you know, but also studying yourselves, you know, and again, like I think that's really the beauty of reflexive science, allows you to do this, and it's being very honest. It allows you to be honest. It's okay to admit that you don't know something, or you change, or how you're white American versus me, right? Having different access to different kinds of information. You see that? It's good to be honest. Yes, Mika.
As you know, academician, it feels kind of counterintuitive to say reflective. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then still write academic paper. Because I used to separate, you know, like poetry and all that, creative writing on this, on the one hand, on the other hand is this strict academic scholarly writing. So it's kind of, I don't know how to...
So refreshing?
How to combine, you know.
Call it reflexive.
Yeah,
reflexive. Yeah.
No, I mean, it's true. I think that most people, and I think generally the perception is that what is academic is positive science. Am I correct? That's a general perception.
Well, yeah, modernness, yeah.
But I think it's just a different kind of science.
Yeah.
It's not opposed to reflexive science, and it shouldn't be, right? It's just with positive science you get a certain kind of data. So I show you the pie chart, right? The numbers. You get a different kind of data. Whereas for me, I go talk to people, I get a different kind of data. That's it. And it's okay for these two to be in communication. They're not against each other. And slowly it's changing. A lot of fields are recognizing this now. So religious studies, of course, right? Ethnographic methods is being very valued. And I think especially in religious studies, when you study these abstract concepts and feelings, emotions, right? And even sociology. Sociology historically is dominated by quantitative methods, but increasingly it's also welcoming